Look at me go. All right, so I'm going right into the old chat screen today. And the reason for that is because I don't have a lot. Actually, I didn't go through and pull up a bunch of articles. I had a very long day today. Got up and ran 9 miles. It was like 90 degrees, so I am beat. But I did want to get on here and talk about a couple of things, as I am wont to do from time to time. And I'm going to thought, since I'm a little tired, I would tackle a nice, easy issue today, and that is ending racism in America. I thought I'd go light, go easy. You know what I mean? If we're going to take a light topic on a Sunday evening, let's do something simple like ending racism in this country. And I figured it all out today on my run. It's super simple, very easy process. I think we can get it done pretty quick. It's not going to take a generation or anything like that. Oh, my freaking camera just went out, but bear with me. It'll be right back on. I know that. I wanted to go with a nice, simple, something we could solve easily, not too complicated. So like I said, we're going to solve racism. And we're going to talk about some things that are pretty important, actually. We're going to start breaking down some of the arguments that we're having. And we're going to start improving on our discourse in this country because we need to be having smarter, better conversations. Bad conversations and poor theory is how we ended up here. So we have to fix that. So how do we fix it? Well, first thing we have to recognize is that race is irrelevant and it's nothing but a human construct. We have to start with that. And then we can go to much better places and have much better conversations than we're having. So what do I mean by that and how do we solve that problem? Well, it's quite simple, actually. Race is not real. It's something made up by scientists to break down humanity into different little categories. It's ridiculous. So we're not going to focus on race. We're going to remember that when we talk about black people and white people, we're really just referring literally to the amount of melanin a person happens to have in their skin. What a silly little thing to divide humanity up on, the amount of melanin that a person has in their skin. And we're going to understand that that little physical characteristic, that minor thing, is being utilized by mainstream media and by politicians to divide us up to their own benefit. So how are they doing this? The number one problem we have is that media and politicians, for some reason, insist upon the fact that there is something called the black community. That is false. There's no such thing as the black community. There's no such thing as the white community. There's no such thing as the Hispanic community. The amount of melanin in your skin does not determine whether you are part of a particular community. That's a ridiculous, ridiculous assumption. I don't understand how anybody could possibly think that that makes any sense. So what does that mean? Well, let's break it down like this. When a person with a lot of melanin in their skin is killed by a police officer who has very little melanin in their skin, that is a big story. That story gets on the national media and we have to talk about it incessantly. And we have to protest and we have to riot and we have to have all these conversations about, this person with melanin is a victim and we're oppressing people with melanin and we're not oppressing, and these people with melanin are taking advantage of those people without melanin, all these different conversations. It's not about that. It's not, what's going on in this country is not about race. It's about poverty. And we need to stop talking about race, and we need to stop talking about what color people are. And we need to start talking about socioeconomic conditions. So let me break down one of the very simple arguments. Let me start here because this is an argument that we have all the time. I've heard it ad nauseum over and over and over and over again. All right. So how does it start? It starts with police are killing blacks. That's how the argument starts, right? That the Black Lives Matter side well, the police are hunting down and killing blacks. So what does Melanin Challenged Conservative say? Melanin Challenged Conservative says, well, if you look at the statistics, the police are killing more melanin challenged people than they are killing melanin in heavy people. Then the melanin heavy person is going to say, yes, but they're not killing melanin challenged people in proportion to the melanin challenged percentage of the population. And then melanin challenged person is going to say that that's because people with more melanin are committing more crime. And here's the statistics to prove it. All right. So why is this not about race? Why the argument tends to end there, turns into other things, but why is that a silly argument to have is because it has nothing to do with race or the color of a person's skin. It has everything to do with poverty. And to understand why poverty is impacting people with a lot of melanin in their skin as opposed to people without, when there are more white people who are poor in this country than there are black people who are poor in this country, right? There are more poor white people, more white people as a total number live below the poverty line than black people. So that's a very important thing to remember. Let's keep that in mind as we go. So if more white people live in poverty than black people, why is it that white people are not committing crime, particularly murder, at the same level as black people? Why is that happening? Why is this the case? That's an important question to answer, and it's actually very, very simple. And I've said it before on this channel. I've said it on all my social. We aren't living in a systemically racist environment. What we do have is legacy issues from the systemic racism that we have had in this country in our history. One of the biggest legacies that we're living with is the legacy of redlining. So here's why you have people, black people, where you look at, oh, there's all this crime. The murder rate is so high. And even though there's more white people than there are black people who are living below in poverty, why isn't the murder rate as high? Because redlining, all right, let's start from the beginning. At the end of slavery, kind of during the Industrial Revolution, not right at the end of slavery, but during the Industrial Revolution, black people in the South migrated to city centers following better work and to get the hell out of the South, where racism was, as you can only imagine, horrible. So they escaped the South, they moved to the South, and they went to these city centers seeking manufacturing jobs, seeking, relative unskilled labor that actually paid well and allowed them to elevate their lifestyle. If you look at the pay gap between whites and blacks from 1940 to 1970, the absolute most progress made in terms of closing that gap happened from 1940 to 1970. It actually kind of came to a stop after the Civil Rights Act. That's a whole other topic of conversation. But what happened was, because you had redlining, as these manufacturing centers started to leave the city and move out into suburban locations and move away from the city centers, you had redlining and you had housing covenants that prevented blacks in the city from leaving the city and following these jobs. They got trapped in these areas. And because the jobs were leaving, they ended up in poverty. Now, like I said, you still have more white people in poverty than you have black people. So why is the crime rate different? It's about population density. If you took all the poor white people in the country and you drop them all into city centers, you push them into this dense area where they're all right on top of each other, the crime rate would be exactly the same. Poor white people just happen to be spread out. I mean, let's face it, drive through the countryside. Where are the trailer parks at? They're out in the countryside, right? There aren't trailer parks in the city. Poor white people live rurally, right? The poor white population isn't dense. It's geographically very spread out across the nation. The poor black community tends to live in city centers, and they tend to live in dense populations. Because of that, the crime rate is higher in those areas. Like I said, if you swapped out the color of the people living in those areas, the crime rates, everything that you're seeing would be exactly the same. And you see the same police reaction because police go where the violence is. So the over-policing, all of this stuff, none of it has anything to do with race. This has to do with poverty and population density. That's where this is all coming from. And it draws a racial picture, but that is a legacy of redlining. So the issue that we're dealing with is a legacy issue, not current systemic racism. That's the problem. And that's what seemingly nobody wants to talk about. And the funny thing is that Republicans will kind of bring it up, but what they'll say is that it's a failure of Democrat leadership. Yeah, you can say it's a failure of Democrat because most of these cities are Democrat ran, blah, 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 blah. That's the talking point. No, it's poverty and population density. That's the issue. And so how do you solve this problem? Well, I've talked about education. Okay, I have talked about education, but the biggest issue that we have here, and look, I'm going to give you just a little background on myself. All right, so I'm half black, half white. So I am melanin neutral. I don't know how I would describe myself in my new parlance, but the bottom line is I'm half black, half white. I grew up. I wouldn't call myself poor, but I do know that my clothes came from the Salvation Army when I was a kid. Like, we didn't have money. We were a family of 5. We had a 2-bedroom house in a sketchy but not terrible neighborhood. I didn't exactly grow up on the south side of Chicago, but I didn't grow up in Mayberry either. So I kind of was at the lower end, probably lower middle class is probably how I would describe my upbringing. I lived in a racially diverse area. And the interesting thing about, so I've had this weird life and then when I turned 15 years old, my parents had gotten divorced. When I turned 15 years old, I moved to a small town in Wisconsin. And I mean a small town, like 2,000 people, small town. Nothing but white people. Not a lot of melanin where I was. So I moved to this small town in Wisconsin. And so I've gotten to see kind of both things here where it's like, okay, here's what it's like here, and here's what it's like here, and here's these 2 different worlds. And before we moved, so we're driving to Wisconsin and with my new stepfather, who's an amazing man, and we're rolling in his truck and country music comes on. And honest to God, this is not a joke. I'm not making this up. I was 15 years old and I genuinely believed that country music wasn't a thing anymore. Like I knew of country music, but I didn't know that country music was still a thing that people made. Like I didn't know there was such a thing as new country music. Why is that important? It's important because we live in the world around us. We don't live beyond the boundaries of the little universe we create for ourselves, right? So I'm living in this community and I'm thinking, this is the world, right? And I remember as a kid driving through like nicer neighborhoods or upper middle class neighborhoods where people had like big houses and big yards. And I remember looking at those homes and thinking, that's a different world. Like it was never in my mind that was something that I would be able to accomplish and achieve because I lived in the world that I lived in. And I had one very well off white friend and I would go over to his house and it was amazing. It was crazy to me that people lived the way he lived. And that was not something that I ever viewed as something that would be available to me. Like I'm not capable of achieving. It's not even not capable. That's not for me. That's not part of the world that I live in. I don't have anybody who could show me how to get to that place. Nobody in my family had a house like that. Nobody lived like that. I remember the greatest thing was getting up on, like, I'd go over and spend a weekend with them. And I remember my favorite thing was getting up in the morning and going into their freezer. And they had those little biscuits with the sausage in them, like the Jimmy Dean's, like the sausage biscuit breakfast things. And you wrap one of those up and put them. My family didn't buy crap. Like, we didn't have money for that nonsense. There was none of this microwavable. And I just thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And this big, beautiful home. And like, he had his own room and all this stuff. And his sister and all of it. They all had all the space. And like, it was amazing. But it was never for me. So when we talk about the problem, when we talk about geography, when we talk about the denseness of like these big cities, when you live in that world, and that world's way worse than the world that I lived in. When you live in that world, how could you possibly see your way out? Your school is trash. You're surrounded by people who are very similar in similar circumstances to you. There's nobody there to show you a way out. So the most important thing, if we really want to start combating this problem, if we really want to start solving this problem, we have to show people who are living in poverty, white and black, trailer park and inner city. We have to start showing these people the way out. That there is a way out, that the world that they see on TV, that the nice neighborhood that they drive through, that the world that feels beyond their grasp is right there. So mentorship programs would be probably my number one. If you want to volunteer your time, if you want to do something useful, if you want to do something helpful, that would be my number one thing. Because you have to take the young person out of that environment and show them that there's a way out. Not just expose them to it, but mentor them in terms of how they get there, because everybody wants it, but you've got to be able to see it. You can't see that when you're living in it. You can't see beyond it. The only reason I'm in the position I am today is because I joined the Navy right out of high school. What the hell was I going to do? I was living in a town with 2,000 people. I was milking cows. I was a terrible student. There was nothing else for me to do, so I joined the Navy and I left. And when I got out of the Navy, even being in the Navy for 9 years, I got married young, had kids young. Well, I was broke most of the time, young enlisted man. I didn't have money. I got out of the service. I sold cars. Horrible way to make a living. Very low income. And I did that for a couple of years. I ended up divorced. I'm paying child support. I'm broke. And the reason that things changed for me is I got my first good paying job. And I was about 30 years old when I got my first really good paying job in the mortgage business. And once I got a taste of that kind of income and what that could do, well, then everything changed. Now everything was possible for me. Then I started to believe if you really want to change the world, if you really want to end racism, we have to teach people in poverty, white, black, everyone, that this world is available to them, that a better world is actually available to them. And the only way to really do that, in my opinion, is to directly expose it to them, directly expose them to it via mentorship programs. Now, I moved down here. I am now living in South Carolina, and in the county that I live in, I tried to sign up for Big Brothers Big Sisters. My kids are all grown. I wanted to sign up for Big Brothers Big Sisters, and unfortunately, due to COVID, they were not able to do their fundraisers, so they're actually not open. They can't function. So I want to start doing a fundraiser, start raising money for them. I know that as an individual person, I probably don't have the ability to raise enough money to get their doors open again. But I'm hoping if I do it and I can get enough people in the county involved, going door to door, doing social media stuff, whatever, that way we can at least start nudging them in the right direction to get them open again. But I look at mentorship programs and I look at how we can change things. And that's how, because hopelessness is a major factor. If you're born into and living in poverty, working towards success is like trying to see the forest through the trees. You just can't see it. You're in survival mode, and you have to be able to break out of that and see if there's something else out there. So the first thing, I posted this on another social media platform, I am no longer going to use, if you watch my content and you see me use the phrase black community, come at me. I am vowing to stop using the phrase black community. There is no such thing as a black community. Your melanin does not make you part of a community. Your socioeconomic conditions do. Stop trying to make upper middle class people of color feel like they have something in common with a criminal just because they happen to have the same amount of melanin or a similar amount of melanin in their skin. That's a ridiculous idea. They don't do that to white people. Right? If a white criminal is killed, the media doesn't go, the white community is outraged. The white community is like, no, that guy's not like me. Right? People are like, yeah, well, he's a criminal. I mean, maybe the cops used too much force, but he started his life on a path that was going to end that way. So why would I be outraged about that? I don't have anything in common with that person. If you're a success, listen, if you don't live in the world of a Jacob Blake or a George Floyd or, these people, then you don't have anything in common with them. Your skin color isn't a commonality factor. It's a random physical trait, the same as the color of your hair or the color of your eyes. So we need to stop pretending like, oh, well, I have the same color skin as this person. I must have something in common. You have nothing in common with them. Stop teaching young black children that don't. Why would you want your teenager walking around with a George Floyd's face on his? He died a tragic death. He died a tragic death that ended in a way that he lived his life was going to take him that direction. So we have to stop with the black community. We have to stop with making skin color and pretending like that's a commonality and creates a community, because it doesn't. We have to stop putting these people up on pedestals and lying about what their lives were, and stop acting like other people who don't live their lives in that way have something in common with them just because they happen to share a skin color. That's a ridiculous thought. That's an important step. The other, like I said, the other thing is we have to work hard to make sure that there's mentorship programs available, that young people born into poverty, into unfortunate circumstances, can see a way out. So that's kind of where I was going with this today. I'm going to jump into the comments here. I'm loaded with comments, all from the same person, just one person, but I appreciate that. So the community, so this is an interesting point. Community just involves a common identity, though. The community can come from the culture too, though, not just skin color. So here's my take on that. And somebody brought this up to me earlier on another platform. If you are, let's say you are a married couple and you have a husband and wife, they make somewhere, between the two, they both make like $50,000 to $60,000 a year. That's $100,000 to $110,000 household income. Doesn't make you rich. It doesn't even make either one of them individually incredibly successful. $50,000 income is good, but it's not great. They have a couple of kids. They live in a decent neighborhood. They drive. What does those people are part of a community, and it's a community of people that they're living in. And it doesn't matter what the skin color of the people around them happens to be. That's their community because they have common things that they're probably all worried about the same thing. Making the mortgage payment, putting into their 401k, saving for retirement, getting little Johnny ready for college, all those different things. That's a community. That's commonality. That's who we are inside as people. That's a common set of concerns and values that we all kind of share that makes us part of a community. Skin color doesn't make you part of a community. It just doesn't, right? You can take a black person who's a billionaire, right? What does Oprah Winfrey and Jacob Blake have in common? Nothing. They don't have nothing in common, right? What does Jeff Bezos and Joe Dirt have in common, right? I mean, their skin color isn't a binding factor. So look around your community. You want to, and that's how people need to view the world is shared sets of values, right? Catholicism is a shared value. There's a Catholic community because Catholicism is based on a set of values and beliefs that bind a group of people together. They have a commonality despite their differing skin colors. They have something in common, something that binds them, right? The color of your skin is not that thing. They're trying to create that. They're trying to make that a thing. That is what like far leftist media is trying to do. They're trying to make your skin color a commonality, but it's not. It's literally just a physical trait. And that creates division and that creates separation. We have to stop allowing that to happen. So like I said, you look around your community. That is your community, right? If you live in a middle-class neighborhood, people who live in that socioeconomic situation are probably have way more in common with you than a person who lives in a very different socioeconomic situation, but happens to share a skin color with you. Does that make sense? I hope. I ramble. It's a big part of what I do. If this is not your first time here, I know that. So I know you know I ramble. But we have to redefine what community means. And then we have to bind together as a community, middle class, wealthy, poor, whatever, and work on moving our nation forward. And we have to attack poverty as a nation. And we have to do that through improving educational outcomes. We have to do that through mentorship programs. We have to do that through understanding that we're all in this together and it's not a racial thing. There's also the connection to Afrocentrism that can create community. I think that it can create I think there's some commonality there, certainly. And there's certainly a cultural aspect to it in the United States where, as another legacy of our history that did segregate blacks and whites, right? So we have that history in our nation where we have separated blacks and whites, and we've done that right up into a generation, right up until Jim Crow, the end of Jim Crow. We had this separation amongst blacks and whites. So Africans who were brought here as slaves obviously were not allowed to participate in the free world in the economy, but escaped slaves did in the North. But I don't want to get into a big history lesson here, but if we hold on to that, we'll never get past it. We have to let that go and understand that we have a common American experience based largely on our socioeconomic circumstances. And we have to be able to reach out and lend a helping hand to those who need it. And it has to be regardless of color. And that can't be where we focus our attention. It just can't be, because we're holding on to the separation of races, holding on to these two different cultures is very much holding on to the sins of the past. We are supposed to be a melting pot, right? Where all of our cultures kind of merge together to create this one new thing. And I think in the United States of America, we've done an incredible job. We've never lived up to our full potential as a nation. We've never lived up to all the promises that the founding fathers made. And the founding fathers were incredibly flawed men with their own issues. But the principles of individual liberty are incredibly important, and we can not allow our society to be divided up and let that go. I always look, my mom used to explain this to me as the difference between a stew and a salad, right? The United States is supposed to be a stew where all the ingredients are mingled together to create one new thing, as opposed to a salad where everything stands alone and is all individually whatever in the bowl, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to explain. I'm tired. I'm very tired. It's been a very long day. And you're asking all these great questions. So I don't know what to do with it. But that's where I'm coming from today. I don't know. I was out on my run today and I'm just like, why is skin color why is this the thing? Why is the amount of melanin a person has such a thing? We have to learn to let that go. We have to learn to let that go. And like I said, I don't care about the person of a color, the color of a person's skin. Mentorship programs for people who are born into poverty, people who are underprivileged, is an absolute necessity if we're going to start really, really solving these problems and creating a society where everybody, at the very least, everybody feels like the entire economy is open to them and is able to, or that they're able to take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of them, and to even understand that those opportunities exist for them. So that's what I wanted to come on here and say today. It is Sunday. I'm keeping it short and sweet. I definitely appreciate the commentary, and I would say I would try and say what your screen name is, but I'm going to screw it up and mispronounce it. But I appreciate you jumping in and getting into the chat today. Otherwise, it would have been very quiet here. So I do appreciate that. I will be back as usual tomorrow at 7 Eastern. So I hope you will join. If you like the content, please like and share. If you are seeing this for the first time, you're seeing me for the first time, please subscribe and turn on notifications. I do a live every evening, Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. And then I randomly pop on here to do what I just did, which is just ramble along on Sundays, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes in the evening. So thank you very much. And we are going to catch you folks next time.